Archaeology, if you talk to an archaeologist and you say, what is excavation? Archaeologists will say, archaeology is destructive, right? Because once you dig down, once you remove, a piece of pottery or whatever from the ground, you can never put that back where you found it, right? What is the benefit to us archaeologically and scientifically to remove those bones and have them effectively crumble into powder? Like, that's a human being we're dealing with. To have someone say, well, excavation is easy, mate, come in and do it. Come out into the middle of the Saudi Arabian desert with me when it's 44 degrees Celsius, over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Come and do that with me and then tell me that I'm not doing work. We've now been able to identify through our own research, through Saudi archaeologists sending us coordinates, we've now identified 1,600 of these structures. And they cover an area of about 350,000 square kilometers. So you have Neolithic ritual structures, some of which go up to like 2,000 feet in length, 600 meters.
Wow.
Spread across this landscape. And it completely blows your mind about what is happening with ritual and communities and stuff during the Neolithic period. I would love to find Atlantis if it existed, right? Because that's the big one. It's like we're hiding it. Okay. I'm not tenured. If I found Atlantis, you don't think that I wouldn't be shouting that from the rooftops? Like, that's me, my future life. Like, that's my kids having food for dinner every night.
We have very different viewpoints on many things.
But a lot of these issues are American issues. They're not Republican or Democrat issues.
Welcome back to Elevated Thoughts, the podcast that's working to restore productive discourse between left and right. I'm your host, Cooper Simmons, and right there below me is my co-host and our show's producer, Mike Marrow. Today, we have the absolute honor of hosting Dr. Hugh Thomas, a field archaeologist and lecturer at the University of Sydney, who's best known for his work excavating two of the most fascinating sites in history, Zagora in Greece and AlUla in Saudi Arabia. And Hugh, you're going to have to correct me if I butchered that.
AlUla.
We're bringing you AlUla. Okay, good. Well, we're bringing you on today because in an age flooded with wild claims about Atlantis, ancient cataclysms, and forgotten super civilizations that probably don't exist, we wanted to hear from someone who's spent years unearthing the truth, literally. So if you've ever wondered, everyone who's listening, what real archaeology looks like, how it stacks up against the fast and loose world of conspiracy theories, and what ancient people actually built and believed, this is going to be the conversation to stick around for. So, Hugh, can't thank you enough for making time for us. How are you today?
I'm good. Thanks so much for having me. It's a fairly drizzly old day here in Sydney, and it's been raining non-stop for the last week or two. So the sun is finally shining, so my mood is lifted.
Awesome. Well,
Glad to hear
that's interesting because you're based in Australia, but you primarily excavate sites in Greece and Saudi Arabia. Can you tell me about how that works?
Yeah, so I work at the University of Sydney, and I'm a lecturer of archaeology there. I teach a couple of different courses about archaeology, and that's where my research is conducted. But I'm part of a couple of different field projects. One at Zagora in Greece, as you've mentioned before, and the second is I co-direct now two archaeological projects in Saudi Arabia. AlUla is not so much a site as it is a town, and we kind of look at all of the archaeology that surrounds AlUla and that region more generally. So we don't sort of excavate, a singular site like, Göbekli Tepe or whatever it might be. We excavate, hundreds or thousands of different types of structures across this massive landscape, trying to sort of understand what is out there and what they are, what these structures are, and when they were used, and who by, and all of those kind of really awesome questions.
That is really cool. So what has been going on online? And to be honest, we wanted to focus more on your real experiences and your real understanding of how to excavate sites properly. But what's been going on online has been this outrage over the fact that they're excavating in the wrong ways. They're not excavating enough. These sites in Turkey, Göbekli Tepe, and you hear these pseudo-archaeologists kind of freak out that they drilled into the ruins and built a structure. Have you ever built a structure over a real archaeological site?
No, I've I've assisted in kind of shoring up the site. So I had a very odd archaeological experience at a site in northern Greece called Methone. Have you ever heard of Philip II of Macedon, Alexander the Great's dad?
I
Um,
have.
okay.
He's better than me.
I'm
So Alexander
more
the
of
Great's dad,
more of the history nerd, I
more of
guess.
the history, yeah, behind me. Alexander the Great's dad, was this amazing general, and he goes to the site of Methone and he sieges it. It's very famously where he got shot in the head with an arrow through his eye, and he lived to tell the tale. He lost his eye, but we started excavating that site under UCLA. I was just a supervisor there, and I was digging a trench that ended up finding what's called an ipoion, which is this large kind of storage pit. And this thing went 9 meters underground. It's about 6 foot by 6 foot, roughly, in a square cut into the bedrock. But I never had to build something over the top of it. But as we went down, we kind of had to build stuff around inside of it to stop things
Sure.
from falling in. So we had what do you call it? A local guy who was a timber worker, and he came and he would put all these amazing beams in, and we would help him. But I've never had to like erect a whole structure over a site before. But you see it happen across the world, so it's fairly common now because in terms of archaeology, there are two ways that you can deal with it once you've excavated it. If it's something like Göbekli Tepe and you want tourism to be accessible to the site and you want tourists to be able to go see it, you can build a structure over it, right? That allows it to be visible, allows people to actually go and see the site and marvel at what is, a truly spectacular piece of archaeology. The other alternative, if you want to protect it, is to rebury it. And you could imagine what the online discourse would be is
Sure.
if people said, hey, well, to protect the Göbekli Tepe, we're just going to rebury it. It would be outrage, right? So, which one do you want? Do you want to be able to go visit these sites so you can make videos about them? Or do you want it buried so that then we only have pictures and we can never really see it again other than what has been recorded? So it's a strange discourse to be having at the moment as an archaeologist.
I think what would be interesting too is if you ask folks, at which time period do you restore a site to? Because many times throughout history, civilization continues to build on top of that on the structures below. So you say, well, what period is the correct period that you should restore it to? And that kind of misses the whole point because it's right. It's to try to collect the evidence and the context. Because I think also the misconception is that these excavation methods are lackadaisical, and perhaps early archaeology it was just figuring things out as you go along. But I think maybe now I'll let you talk about it more. You're the one in doing the field work. There's a much more rigorous method to try to preserve the site because as you talk, right, digging everything up is potentially destructive and remove some of that context. So it's important to do certain protocols and things to preserve that evidence.
Archaeology, if you talk to an archaeologist and you say, what is excavation? Archaeologists will say archaeology is destructive, right? Because once you dig down, once you remove, a piece of pottery or whatever from the ground, you can never put that back where you found it, right? It is removed. You have one shot, like to quote Eminem, one shot, one opportunity to get it happening, right? So archaeologists are running around everywhere with mum's spaghetti vomited all over themselves. But the point is that you get one opportunity to do this. Then once you've excavated it, we have uh, we have to make sure it's preserved. We have to make sure that we do what we can to the best of our knowledge and understanding to protect that site. Now, putting shelters over things like we're learning from those as well. There was a really great thread the other day about how the structure was built over Çatalhöyük, which is another really important site related to sort of like early towns and cities growing. And the point is that they built this sort of cover over it, and then it turned into like quite a humid hotbox area. And so then it's like, okay, well, how do we alleviate this? So there's this constant evolution of trying to look at what is the best type of structure, how do you allow airflow to go in, but limiting things like rain and snow as much as possible. I don't think at the moment, realistically, there's like something that is absolutely perfect, right? But the alternative is that you rebury it. And the thing also to remember is that in terms of things like, rain or anything like that hitting stone, the erosion of stone can take time, right? So
Right.
the point is that these are always evolving and developing situations. I think Karahan Tepe, for example, is about to put up their structure, but they've designed it specifically to be modular, so they can actually sort of increase sections of it
Ah,
as excavations spread. And so, that in a sense is probably a new style of development that's coming into play with these. So it's not my area of specialty in terms of these structures to protect archaeological sites. But that example I used before, that deep Iboyon that I went down 9 meters. The reality is that for safety, what they did is they ended up backfilling it, because you can't have a 9 meter deep pit sitting there that people can go and fall into, and tourists and whatever else. I mean, it's not really a tourist site that people go and visit anyway. But the point is that is now protected it. And so if someone wants to go back and dig that stuff out and see what we did, they can go and do that very easily.
Hmm.
and
That's
there's now
very
another
interesting.
and there's
Yeah,
another order of magnitude of difficulty to this, right? So getting to these sites, because they're obviously usually in far-flung locations, sometimes not, but a lot of times they are, and it makes it difficult getting the equipment there. And as I read some of your recent posts on Twitter, I'm a little confused because, as we all know, archaeology is this giant slush fund with all these billions of dollars lying around, and I don't see any five-star luxury resorts on the where your excavation site is currently. Maybe you could talk a little bit more about what it's like to get to the site and getting the materials there. And then I thought it was really interesting, right? You have to bring all your food and water in, but then at the end of the day, all that stuff's gone, but then you have to bring the heavier stuff home at the end of the day, right?
Yeah. To give you an idea, my very first field season, I was on an island called Kythera in Greece. This was in 2003, I think. And we stayed in the traveling monks' quarters of a church. And it was a room that was maybe, 4 or 5 meters wide. So what's that, like 15 feet or something? I don't know.
Sure, sure, roughly.
I use
Yeah.
metric, guys. So
times three.
yeah, times three. And the walls were concrete, but they were falling apart. I had about sort of, a foot worth of space between the bed on either side of me because I was the youngest person there. Um, our shower was a hose. It wasn't 5-star accommodation. It was rough. And there in Kythera, we had to drive around to sort of various sites. Some other sites that I've stayed at, like in Cyprus, um, you know, we lived a 3 or 4 minute walk off the site. Fantastic. But where I work in Saudi Arabia now, I regularly have to drive sort of 45 minutes along a road and then an hour and a half off track into the desert, to find a solitary structure in an area that is thousands of square kilometers, on a little hill amongst, a whole, thousands of other little hills. I've got to go find that, get there safely with a team, and then get out again at the end of the day. So each site has its challenges. The one that you were talking about was this site at Zagora,
Right,
which
in Greece.
anyone who goes there is changed by it because it really is one of the most difficult sites that I've ever had to go to because you drive to this site, you park at right near a church, and you walk along this path, and the path is about a couple of kilometers long. It takes you about 20 or 30 minutes, but there's no water on the site. There's no real shelter. There's like one little hut on the site, and then a really dodgy little kind of shepherd's hut there that's like often filled with like dead sheep and stuff like that.
Oh,
And you have to walk in. You have to carry absolutely everything in, all your water for the day, all the food, any equipment you need. I carried wheelbarrows down there. I carried huge wooden beams to help create the roof of the little dig hut that we have there. And then, of course, at the end of the day, you have to take all your rubbish out. But of course, all of the artifacts that you're getting, and some of that is incredibly heavy. The one that is the most annoying is what's called heavy residue, which is there's this technique called flotation, which is where you put dirt through a sort of a series of tanks and you collect the botanical samples. And the,
okay.
the heavy stuff kind of sinks to the bottom. And they collect that because it's where you find really small microscopic lithics and other various bits and pieces. but that stuff's heavy and there's a lot of it. So you end up just having it in bags and you have to carry that off site for sorting. And, you know, you've dug a day of whatever it is from 6 in the morning till 2 or 3 or 4 in the afternoon. And now you got to walk back out of site up the
Hmm.
equivalent of about 30 stories in height as you head up. And you have to carry this stuff with you and it's heavy. And like, I'm a big guy. So like, it's always like, who can carry the heavy stuff? Oh, well, Hugh can take it. And then,
Yes.
but everyone carries something. But it's tough. It's not easy. It's really not easy. And we have people who have real, develop real physical issues from doing archaeology. There's hardly an
Sure.
archaeologist I know who doesn't have bad knees just because of things like this.
Right.
When I think of an archaeological excavation, I don't really think of like pickaxes and shovels. I literally think of like a paintbrush dusting along on bones or something. I think I saw an image of you guys because when you say you rebury artifacts or remains or whatever you are reburying, that's like pretty shocking to me. I bet you Jimmy Corsetti would have a big problem with that, right? But tell us more about that. So I saw an image where you're excavating tombs and you actually found human remains, right? And those remains ultimately usually end up reburied. Is that the truth?
Not always, no. So in some instances we do. And the reason for that is that when you're dealing with human remains, you have an ethical responsibility to deal with
Sure.
them properly. So if we're digging and we find well-preserved skeletal remains, that is that I can trowel around it, I can brush it, and I can remove that piece of bone, complete or pretty much complete out of the trench so that it can go and be studied. Fantastic. But we've had instances where we have been digging down and the skeletal remains are like they're almost like the consistency of kind of like really powdery rotted wood, right? So you brush it, and even with a brush, we have the kind of the lightest tool that we have is like an air blower. Do you know, like with a camera lens, you might have a little puffer thing that
Yes,
get rid
yes.
of the dust?
Sure.
We use those in the field to kind of remove like grain by grain. And sometimes that is too much for the bones. Like the bone will start. And so what we end up saying is, well, listen, we can get maybe a sample or two of what we need to maybe C14 date the bones. But what is the benefit to us archaeologically and scientifically to remove those bones and have them effectively crumble into powder? Like that's a human being we're dealing with.
Right.
We can gain some information and some knowledge about them, but at the same time, like, there's no point me digging through and just destroying their body for the sake of it. And we can dig around that body and make sure the rest of the tomb is cleared, so that just that skeleton's remained. And then what we would do is we would use the sieved dirt that we have, the sediment from the inside of that tomb, and we then will take that sediment and place it back over the body, right? So it's being reburied in the same stuff that it was buried in. And then regularly, we've done things like we've put signs in there, like laminated signs in both in Saudi Arabia in English and Arabic, saying like, this has been archaeologically excavated. This is in the dirt above it. This has been archaeologically excavated. There are human remains underneath here. There is nothing else. Don't touch it. If you come across this, leave it alone, right? Trying to make sure that if any sort of local Bedouin or whatever like that is walking through and says, oh, like why were all of those Australian archaeologists like looking in that tomb? I'll stick my head in and have a little look and see what's there. It means that hopefully this will stop them from having a scratch around themselves if they think that, because there's a lot of misinformation about what is in these tombs as well. So
Sure.
you just have to think about it ethically. In terms of more major sites like Zagora, sometimes you'll backfill sites because you're going to come back and open them up and excavate them. Zagora is not a tourism site. Like there are not thousands upon thousands of people flying to Greece to be like, I'm going to Zagora, even though it's really crucially important for our understanding of early Iron Age Greece. The point is that for the visibility of it, if you left it exposed, like we there's no point. Like you could put a shelter over it if you wanted to, but then someone's going to see a rectangular hole in the ground with a couple of walls running through it, right? Like it's not going to be anything that's going to be like, wow. There are no T pillars or anything like that there. So, you know, It's really often up to the local. I think there's a conflation that happens with a lot of people online between sort of the archaeologists who dig the site and then like the local government authorities who are the ones who manage it more generally, and who make those decisions about tourism and various other bits and pieces. And archaeologists do have to kind of um, make sure that that like the local government should have a say in how these sites are being treated. Like it's the archaeology that belongs to them. Like it's in their
Right.
area. And the other thing is to remember is that a lot of these places are not particularly wealthy, right? Like
Mhm.
it's if you can draw tourism in and you can do it in a safe and ethical way that limits any damage to the archaeology, why not do it? Why not, empower the local people that are there to make a money and a living off their history. It's a
Yeah.
really so I think in summary of your question, like you just have to look at the scenarios that you're coming into and um, make sure that whatever you're doing is being done for the right reasons and not just because you expect to get some heat online because you reburied a skeleton.
Yeah. To be honest, the ethical concern is something that I hadn't even thought about. I'm a crude guy, so I don't, I would never rob a grave. But I guess
Well,
is
and
that
I
what it's
think
kind of seen as? Is
yeah, I think people disassociate themselves, right,
yeah.
from it because you say, well, what do I care about a skeleton that's 5,000 years old, or whatever? But if someone said, "Hey, listen, I'm going to go dig up your grandma,"
Yeah.
oh, her bones are pretty rubbish, but you know what? Who cares? Like, I'm just going to rip them out and chuck them in a museum so they can live in a,
It's
you
fair.
know, in a acid-free, tissue-lined box in a climate-controlled museum. Like, there are just we take samples off site as well for C14 samples, right? Now, C14 allows you to take, these days, relatively small amounts of bone to date those. And then one of the things we do is that we now will take those bone samples, get them resent back to us, and then go and put them back in the tomb because it's just a nice thing to like. If someone dug up my grandma, I would like her to be put back in the tomb that she was in. And just because you don't believe in the religious beliefs that they have back then in terms of disturbing tombs, whatever, doesn't mean that you're right. Like it's we need to take, archaeology needs to be sort of agnostic or whatever, right? We need to not be placing sort of modern standards of sort of religion or anything else like that on an ancient people who wouldn't believe it. So ethics with human remains is now quite a hot topic in terms of how do you display human remains in museums? How do you do it in an ethical way so that you are, you know, you're not just doing it to be macabre and to draw people in, that you're doing it for a scientific reason or a teaching or an educational reason. So there's a lot of things to juggle. And I think that's some of the nuance that gets lost within sort of the wider discourse.
So I think I
You're
could appreciate that more because, were you ever familiar with the bodies exhibit as
I
it was
was just
called?
gonna say it.
Yeah. It was a big, kind of
Yeah.
pop-up, attraction in New York City and then obviously many other cities, and I haven't gone to it, having an interest in biology and stuff, I thought it was fascinating, but then to learn afterwards that there was some ethical concerns about how many of those specimens were acquired, it did kinda make me feel a little unsettled and, that not maybe everyone had consent, who became an exhibit, and I thought to myself, like, "Oh, I struggle." I was like, "Well, if I'm dead, who's gonna use my body? What do I care about?" But I'm like, Maybe I don't want it displayed, just to be gawked at, right, by passergoers."
I
But,
can give you a really crazy story about
by
this.
by all means.
So, uh, about a year ago, I was visiting my mum, who lives in this area of Victoria, which is the state to the south of where I am now. And we went to this local like wildlife park thing with my kids, and we were going around, lovely time. And they have a little room which was an amphibian room, right? So it was like frogs in fish tanks.
Mhm.
And I walk in and I'm looking at all the frogs, and I get to this one tank, and in it is a human skull. And I'm like, that's a real human skull. And you could tell that it was an old medical skull. So people like my father-in-law is a surgeon. Like he had one, a skeleton that was
Sure.
donated to science that they use for teaching, and it was one of these ones because you can tell often because they have like the top of the cranium is sawn in half, and they'll have like
Okay.
little hinges so that science, medical students can look inside and annotate and do whatever else they need to do. And this skull was with the little hinges and stuff like that was sitting in the center of this fish tank and with a frog sitting on top of it. And I was like, oh my God. Like, and so I went and I spoke to some forensic anthropology friends of mine who I work with, and I was like, what do I do in this situation? It's not a crime scene. Do you report these things? How do you do it? And they were like, well, first off, you need to chat to them. So I called them up on the phone that afternoon after I got advice and said, hey, guys, I'm just letting you know, you've got a human skull in your fish tank. It didn't have water, but it was, a frog tank.
They were like,
Right,
yeah,
right.
we know it's sick.
No, they were like, no, the owner did that. Like one of those decorations you can get at a fish shop. It came with the tank. And, sure, maybe it did come with a tank. Like, there's no way this person was like, I'm going to go find a human skull and put it in a frog tank, right? But it was placed in there, and she's like, it's not real. And it's like, guys, I dig up skulls for a living. Like, I could tell you that's a real skull, like with
Yeah, yeah.
95% accuracy. Like, you can see it perfectly. And they were like, okay, well, we'll deal with it, and we'll contact someone. So it's, you know, think about the ethics of that, like that person donated their body to science. It was used for science. Then eventually it probably ended up in a doctor's house or a surgery. He may have died. It may have ended in a box. Someone's like, well, let's just put it in a tank and give it to that, wildlife park or whatever. And hey, presto, like that's how it ends up there. But that was a person. And we need to remember that especially about human remains.
Yeah, I think another funny anecdote about archaeology is something that I had learned. I'm sure many of those folks who got mummified, not to change, entire different time periods in history, but many of those folks mummified because it was a very expensive and process reserved for the higher echelons of society. I didn't think they expect to eventually wind up as paint in like the early 1800s and 1900s. I learned that a lot of mummy dust was used, and just to make a paint shade and just to reduce to a simple commodity like that. So
I think
yeah,
it
I think it's
translates as mummy brown, I think, from memory. And,
yeah.
people used to eat samples of mummies. They used to think they had medicinal properties and stuff. So they had, you could take, the 18th century, you could go buy a mummy and take it back to the UK or wherever and have like unwrapping parties. And like there's um, a colloquial story, and I don't know the accuracy of this or not, or whether it's just like, Snopes will fact check me or not. But in America, do you guys do pass the parcel at kids' birthday parties where you have a parcel, it's got a present in it? It's a huge thing in Australia and the UK. So
Okay. I don't think we have
there's a
that
whole
custom.
Bluey episode on it. You guys, I think, have young kids, right?
I watch
We'll have
Bluey. I
to
need
watch.
to catch that
Yeah,
episode.
watch the Bluey episode.
Okay.
But it's a thing where you have a kid's present, it's wrapped up in some paper, and they put multiple layers of paper, and you play a song, and it goes around the circle of kids. You stop the song, and they
Okay.
unwrap it, they get a little prize or whatever, and then it goes around again. And the story I always heard is that like that was based off people taking turns unwrapping mummies
Oh, wow.
at these unwrapping parties. That story would hit more if you actually knew what the heck I was talking about. But there's clearly a cultural divide in kids' birthday parties here. So,
Obviously.
It sounds like a fun one. We both have the 1 and 2 year olds, so yeah, we do want to do that. I want to change gears, Hugh, because you
yeah, sure.
mentioned religion a little bit and honoring these folks and maybe not subscribing to the religion. So you're working in Saudi Arabia, the birthplace of Islam, and I'm wondering because I've heard theories that go way back to say this desert was just a vast wasteland, and I think your work is kind of changing that impression. And I'm wondering if you can answer that while tying in the understanding of the religion in the area as well.
Yeah, so we have a really cool structure. Let me give you a little story about a type of structure that exists in Saudi Arabia.
I'm going to put pictures on the screen so our viewers will know, but can you just tell us, like, in 3 sentences what this thing is?
Okay,
AlUla?
so
Yeah.
we have these amazing structures in Saudi Arabia called Mustatil, which are these rectangular structures that are effectively monumental ritual structures dating back about 7,000 years or so, from about 5,300 BCE down to maybe about 4,400 BCE. And these are, you know, cultic buildings where ritual practices are taking place. And our understanding of them is developing, you know, weekly, but they are really, truly spectacular archaeological remains of which very little study has been done. So, you know, they were first identified in the 1970s. There's this publication by a guy called Peter Parr, who funnily enough, is good friends with Dr. Melissa Kennedy, who is now the main researcher of Mustatil. So he and his team identified this random rectangular structure in the middle of the Saudi Arabian desert. And he's like, we don't know what this is. You know, someone should work this out. Go another 30 years, no one has really published on it as much as we can tell. Then there are some Saudi researchers who published in the early 2000s. They put it on websites. They say, hey, look, there's more of these things. And it's not until about 2017 that my predecessor at the University of Western Australia project that I worked on in Saudi, a guy called Professor David Kennedy, he published a paper which sort of said, hey, these structures, I've now identified about 390 or whatever it was, almost 400 of these within this area. And they're old because there's a lot of later archaeology built on top of them.
Mm.
So 2018 comes around. David has now got a project in Saudi Arabia, which I'm part of. And another team goes and excavates one of these Mustatil. And inside, so just to kind of briefly describe it, effectively, think of a really big rectangle. That's what Mustatil means in Arabic, is rectangle.
Okay.
And imagine a long rectangle. The two short ends are these thick bars of stone. And in one side, you have an entranceway, and the other side, you have a chamber. And they're connected by long walls. And you can have 2, 3, 4 long walls tied together, connecting these things to make courtyards, you know, from 1 to 4 courtyards in the center. And the idea is that you would walk into it from the one side, you'd go through the courtyard to the other side, and you would do something in this chamber. So the first publications come out about them, or the first excavation happens on it, and they find in it just dozens of faunal remains, animal remains, but all really kind of unusual stuff. And it appears to be like there was a mixture of like cattle, and there was a mixture of wild animals in there. They found some bits of human on top as well, which they couldn't quite understand, but they C14 dated it and it came back at about 5,300 BCE. And then our project turned into an excavation project. So we started excavating them again and again and again and again. We found the same stuff in each one. Effectively, you're finding that inside these chambers, you only find the upper cranial elements. So effectively, your top teeth here up to the top of your skull, and horns of horned animals, cattle, domesticated sort of sheep, goat, and some wild animals. But in every single one of them, the exact same. And some of the horns, and I encourage you to show this on screen, some of the horns are phenomenally preserved. Like horns are made up of a bony core, but around it is keratin, which is the stuff your fingernails are made of.
Right.
And the keratin is still preserved after
Oh, wow.
7,000 years, right? It looks like you've like cut off a horn from a cow and left it in the sun for a few weeks, and then there it is. And so we're doing all of this amazing science with these things, but the point of the Mustatil and why they're so interesting is that I mentioned before that David had found, 300 and something Mustatil, or identified 300 and something Mustatil. We've now been able to identify through our own research, through Saudi archaeologists sending us coordinates, through just like armchair archaeologists sending us stuff off Google Maps. We've now identified 1,600 of these structures. And they cover an area of about 350,000 square kilometers. So to give you guys an idea of that, that's the size of Poland, okay? So you have Neolithic ritual structures, some of which go up to like 2,000 feet in length, 600 meters,
Wow.
spread across this landscape. And it completely blows your mind about what is happening with ritual and communities and stuff during the Neolithic period. These are clearly built by people coming together. We've done estimates on like how much weight some of the stones are that are present. Like, so one of the Mustatils that we surveyed was 525 meters long. So what's that? 1,500 feet, somewhere in that region. Um, it's made up of 12,000 tons of basalt stone. So we were able to work out, based off modern ethnographic examples, like how long it takes for, 30 people to make that Mustatil. And, you're looking at a couple of months, depending on how many hours of day they're working. But at the same time, what you're finding is that, like, if someone is making a Mustatil, they can't look after their herds. They can't look after the children. They can't look after the animals. They can't, the elderly. They can't go and collect water. They can't forage. So then you have a whole army of people behind them. So
Right.
clearly, you've got huge groups of people coming together to make these absolutely massive structures in the middle of the desert. And it shows that that landscape was really dynamic and filled with people, and um, that there was this cultic belief that spread across an absolutely massive area, because no matter where we're digging, we're finding the same basic stuff, only the upper skulls and the horns of these animals, nothing else. So we're at the sort of the Melissa is now starting to look at that idea of, ancient cult and religion. How do these things spring up? Because they seemingly come from nowhere and then just disappear relatively quickly. And we don't find anything quite like them in Saudi Arabia after that time period. So it's a really cool type of archaeology. And, like, one of the things that we do now is we throw just an absolute truckload of science at it as well. So, um, the cattle, yeah, the cattle teeth that we have. So we find these skulls. We take the cattle teeth, and a guy called Dr. Rudy Alagich is taking samples every millimeter or 2 millimeters up the entirety of the tooth, and sending those off for isotope samples so that he can look at how that cow drank water, or how that cattle drank water over the period of its life, over the development of that tooth, right? So we get a
Wow.
real tiny snapshot of what the environment was like over, say, a year and a half. Dr. Lara Strolin, who is our our archaeozoologist, a person who studies animal bones, has been able to work out not only how many different types of animals we have in them, like what's the MNI, the minimum number of animals that we have, but she's also been able to work out, how old some of these cattle were when they were killed. They're not sort of young cattle that were sort of, you know, killed when they were 1 year olds, because they're starting to get a bit, randy, and they're starting to fight the other bulls to try and sort of, be the alpha cow, or in the flock, in the herd, sorry. But, able to work out how old these animals are. Now we're doing a thing called protein analysis on it, where you can take fragments of the teeth, right? Tiny fragments of it, and they can use the proteins in those teeth to work out whether that cattle tooth belonged to a boy cow or a female cow, right?
Wow.
Wow.
Like, isn't that amazing? Like, and
It
that's something
is.
that's relatively new. So we can get a sample off the ground from a Mustatil, send it to the University of York in the UK, and then a couple of days later, or not a couple of days, but, weeks or months later, we can get a report saying that fragment of tooth you found was from a bull, or that was from a heifer. And that is a phenomenal level of detail that we have. So we can start seeing what types of animals were they sacrificing, at what age, what were they drinking, where were these animals moving through the landscape. Like, this is what modern archaeology is. I think people just don't see it, which is the real shame, because
Right.
I personally think it's super cool. And I think that the more people hear about this kind of stuff, will hopefully agree with me.
Well,
You,
it
you,
sounds like you're describing animalistic occultist sacrifices before they chop up their dead and bury them in pieces, which sounds pretty interesting to me. I mean, when we look at the Rikat structure, they haven't taken very many animal bones or human fragmented skulls out of there. Am I right?
I mean, there's the Richat structure is really fascinating, because I don't know if you've ever seen the videos online. There's like a local guy who's made a museum outside of it. Have you seen this? And
No.
it's
no, no.
filled with Acheulean hand axes that are hundreds of thousands of years old, right?
Oh,
And
wow.
lithics that are tens or
Early
hundreds
human.
of
Yeah.
thousands of years old. And there are videos of people walking across the Rishat and finding just huge piles of these stone tools, right? What
Wow.
are they? We find stone tools on the surface regularly, like, so you can find stuff that old. I once was being filmed for a documentary, and I had a student walk up to me and was like, Hugh, I think I found something, and it was like a 500,000-year-old hand axe that he just picked up off the ground. And you're like, oh my gosh, buddy, like, well done. Like,
Yeah,
where did
totally
you find this?
staged.
And he's like, oh, I think it was over there. I was like, please tell me you know where you found this because that's important. But the point is that, let's say there was a huge flood that hit the Richat structure, right? Those stone tools ain't going to be there. Or if you
Mhm.
have a big, city, you're going to find fragments of that. And, it's, yeah. It,
I didn't mean to bring it there. I was just saying it sounds like what you've discovered. I mean, I've seen the circular and triangular pictures on alien accounts on Twitter saying, "How could this have gotten here? It's no one's explaining it. No one's excavating it." I mean, I guess today
I
we're
think
proving
just
them wrong.
people just don't want to listen. I think you touched on two really important points that, and maybe we can try to bridge the divide here a little bit. And I don't mean to keep beating on pseudo archaeologists, but I just think folks don't seem to understand that archaeology is willing. There is no orthodoxy. Archaeology is willing to embrace these new ideas and these new findings, and I'm sure a lot of these like local governments would be more than happy to be able to rightfully claim like that they have some brand new archaeological finding there. But there's this narrative that you know. Non-experts are silenced, but also the second point that I wanted to address is that there's many times where the general public who don't necessarily have any expertise in any particular field of anthropology, archaeology can be very, very helpful. I mean, even if it's just down to, like you said, the woodworker helping provide, supports so you can continue your excavations, or even just young students, participating in it. So maybe you can talk a little bit more about those two ideas. Like I said, how the general public and non-experts are being involved and how there really is no orthodoxy.
in terms of the Orthodoxy, let's take Atlantis, right? Because that's the big one.
Right.
It's like we're hiding it. Okay. I'm not tenured. If I found Atlantis, you don't think that I wouldn't be shouting that from the rooftops? Like that's me, my future life. Like that's my kids having food for dinner every night and being, because I'll have a permanent job, which I'm on a what's called a fixed term position at the moment, right? So I don't have that tenure. I don't have that security. I would love to find Atlantis if it existed, right? If someone wants to go, and for a country, imagine, especially some of these countries that are not as wealthy as other ones, for example, if they did have something they could identify as Atlantis, how fantastic for their economy and for their tourism,
Right.
and to, as I said, to help empower the local population to utilize their history and the archaeological remains in that area to sort of help build those local communities up and to take them, to make them more prosperous and make them, more, give people jobs, right? So of course there's no thing like we go through peer review for our academic papers. There are people who submit academic papers like that I've reviewed, and I've rejected them because they are not acceptable to be published or they're not scientifically sound. And people will say, "Oh, well, that's just you rejecting because you don't agree with it." It's like no, because like there are ways that you can do this stuff with science and with proper archaeological practice, and that wasn't followed. And so the results that you have there are not accurate. So they need to be, you can correct that, go ahead and fix it up so it is. But, it, you know, I regularly disagree with my colleagues. My wife is an archaeologist. I disagree with her. We have arguments about archaeology. So, of course, like we don't all believe the same things. But as I said before, this empowering local people, I think is really important because for me, I'm a guest in Greece. I'm a guest in Saudi
Right.
Arabia, right? That's not my history. I'm Australian, and then my background in that is England and Scotland, right? So I
Right.
don't have a long connection with that landscape or with those people. But what we do is we try to incorporate local people into our projects in order for them to have a say about what is happening with their archaeological remains, like the history of their ancestors, but also uh, in order to kind of help share the knowledge that we have with them. And I think that's really important that we as archaeologists make sure that when we are doing field work that we are sharing. So when I'm in, I can be out in the middle of the desert of Saudi Arabia 100 kilometers, off road in the middle of nowhere, no cell service, none of that sort of stuff. And people will turn up, like locals will turn up in cars. And
Really?
one thing we say to them is come around, look at what we're doing. And we have a pamphlet for them that's in English and Arabic. And we say, here's a pamphlet. Like it describes what we're doing, what we're finding. It has like QR codes so that when they go back to town, if they wanted to follow us on Twitter or whatever else it might be, they can do it. And if they want to report anything back to us, they can do that. And I think that's really important because when you sit there and you say like, don't come near the site, I don't want you to view it, that's when these kind of conspiracies happen. And it's not just in the online echo chamber, right? There
Mhm.
is this huge conspiracy in regards to a huge area of the Arabian Peninsula, which is, these structures that we're excavating are filled with Ottoman gold, and stuff. And so they, and it's always my cousin, his cousin's friend, he scratched around one of these things and he found Ottoman gold, and it's like, prove it, show me.
Sure.
Show me an image of it or something, but they can't, right? Because oh well, yeah, I'll get that to you, and then they never do.
Hmm.
But by kind of saying to them, well, come out with me, come watch what we do. Um, I think that is vitally important to kind of help to demonstrate it, and that's why with Göbekli Tepe, I mean, I'm a bit sick of talking about Göbekli Tepe because it's not the only archaeological site in the world, right? It's super cool. Don't get me wrong,
So I've
really
heard.
important. But yeah, exactly. But then as I said before, they've built something that now you can go and watch these guys dig, right? If they're uncovering something and then they're quickly putting dirt back on it to hide it back up, you can go and see that if you'd like to, right? Of course they're not doing it. You will never see that. But it's the idea is that, I think I agree in some respects with some of the things that are said online, which is that uh, if you look at physics, for example, you have people like Brian Cox, right? Who are these
Right.
Carl Sagan, these amazing voices in science that can so beautifully articulate, the mysteries of the cosmos. And I don't think that archaeology has that. I think that there is a real void within us, within the sort of the public sphere of people, who can be approached and asked and be part of these documentaries. And I think that's why a lot of people are looking towards other sources and these big names. I would love a Discovery Channel or a Netflix series about what we do, right? I've been in a Discovery Channel documentary. You can go check it out on YouTube if you want. But
Linked below.
put the link. Listen, it's half of it's wrong because it was filmed like very early on in our understanding of these sites, and they've developed over time, right? And
Wow.
but the point is that we need to, as archaeologists, encourage more connections with local populations. We need to encourage more, just general interested people to come and experience and see what we do, and to vocalize that in a way that is understandable to them as well, so that it isn't just drowned out by these louder voices that are only fixated on really very specific and minute things that don't quite understand the nuance of archaeology and just how much we actually know about archaeological sites.
Yeah, I don't want to name drop, but it's just folks like Graham Hancock, right? For his talent is telling a story. He has a great narrative, and it's very entertaining listening to him. And I don't think the rub is necessarily that he has different beliefs. I think maybe perhaps what it is that, and at least for me, because I'm an actually guy, and I have to always correct the record. But I think it's just frustrating because because archaeology is hard. I think that folks don't seem to understand too is that it must be so frustrating to be doing all this research and to really either find nothing new or actually do find something that stands contrary to the work you've done before because you're like, crap, I need to go back to square one and the drawing board and kind of figure all this stuff out. So I guess, is there any points in your career that like you have a nice anecdote for that's just kind of made you rethink it, or at least that you've been involved in a project that's shook up the field a little bit?
Bunches of them. I mean, just to quickly address Graham Hancock, like, you know, I don't think Graham Hancock is necessarily bad for archaeology. Like, I don't hold the views that a lot of my colleagues do. I wish Graham would back up his theories with evidence. That's what I want. Peer review, put a paper in for peer review, right, with your science and go for it, right?
Yeah.
And you can do it now in certain journals, and the Rising Star Cave is a good example of that, where people have put in peer review. The whole process is open, so you can see the peer reviews, you can see all of that stuff, right? I think that would be really great. I think that we as an archaeology community also sit in this echo chamber of Twitter and stuff sometimes, because I teach first year archaeology, like the first course that you do at Sydney University. And we have really pushed like what real archaeology is in that. And what's been a real benefit of that is that our numbers are actually increasing every year in terms of, in the 2 years I've been teaching that course, our class numbers have doubled, right? But which is fantastic. There's this interest. Funnily enough, in the very first lecture, we talked a little bit about how, there's this real scientific archaeology. And I said, I just did it for fun. I said, has anyone watched that Ancient Apocalypse series on Netflix? Does anyone know who Graham Hancock is? Not a single one raised their hand.
Wow.
And that's not saying that Graham Hancock is not doesn't have a following, and that there aren't lots and lots of people, millions of people watching this Netflix series. But I think in terms of sort of the young people coming through, it's like, I don't want to watch some old man talk about this. Like, I want to talk about, I'm watching Euphoria and then going and doing something else. So,
Right.
People have an appetite for a big spectacle, right? They need it simplistic. They need it an algorithm to feed it to them in 35 seconds. And archaeology and humanities is such a complex field with nuance in every aspect of it. You can't
And that's
you
the point. I think that's following on your second point, right? So
Yep.
a really good example is I'm about to go to France for a conference called the Carne in 6 weeks' time. I am going to give a presentation there where I say that a paper I published, or I co-published a few years ago, needs to be updated because what we have found is different, or there's now an alternate theory. So just kind of backstory so you can see it in practice, right? Um, when we first started off in Saudi Arabia, we were a remote sensing project. So we identified sites through satellite imagery, and then we did helicopter photography. So I used to lean out of helicopters and take photos of archaeological sites. And then we subsequently built in ground survey and excavation. And one of the things we ground surveyed really early on in 2018 when we first started was this large kind of monumental cyst burial that had been badly disturbed, and there were bits of human bone all over the joint. So it was one of the first things that we excavated, and we got a C14 date from it. And we realized that this thing dates to about 6,000 years old or so. And we went and we excavated it thoroughly in 2019. We collected all the bones off the sample. And then we found out that sort of inside it was 10 humans, right? There were the remains of 10 individuals minimum in there, right? So you lay out all the bones and you look at what are the replicating bones. So like, I've got six adult humeri or femurs or whatever else. And that means that I know that I have a minimum of 6 adults because they're all the left ones, and then I have some children and whatever else. And then we found another one of these things, and we excavated that. And we were like, okay, so what we have here is these tombs that people are going back to, and they're burying family members in it over generations. Because the C14 dates for each one of these individuals, these tombs were being used for like 600 years, right? Based off that. More, 800.
just really quick, C14, is that radiocarbon dating?
Yeah, radiocarbon dating.
Okay.
And actually, we use a slightly different one called bioapatite dating, which measures a slightly different part of the bone, but we won't get into that, right? That's a whole new type of C14 radiocarbon dating that has only been accessible, I'd say, I don't even know how old it is now, but like relatively recently, where most bones that you need the collagen inside to do the radiocarbon dating. And this one uses what's called the bioapatite, the mineral sort of stuff of the bones itself. And it means that all of those samples that were sent off that had no collagen in it from arid environments can now be retested to get dates from them that are pretty accurate. So super cool, right? Like,
Yeah.
new development, like the proteins in the teeth and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But the whole point about those tombs is that we put out a theory. We said, okay, what we think is happening is that people are building a tomb and they're going back and they're reusing it over sort of generations, right? Putting someone into it, and then they'll push someone to the side and they'll put someone else into it. And unfortunately, these are all disturbed, in antiquity and modernity as well. So like we don't quite know how it was done. Then we found a third one of these, and that one had a whole bunch of stones on top. And so we dug it. We're like, okay, maybe it's unlooted. Maybe we'll find the evidence of someone like digging into it, pushing the other skeletal remains to the side and putting someone else into it. No, it was just jumbled human remains all throughout it. And we were like, oh, it must have been disturbed in antiquity. Bummer. Okay, well, still important. It still has 10, 12 people in it. Really interesting archaeology. We'll learn more about the people. But it's been disturbed in antiquity. Then last year, I go to a site and I'm like, oh, there's another one of these tombs. Okay, let's go for it. Take all the stones off the top, huge stones. Some of them are hundreds of kilograms. Push them out of the way, get them out of the way, done. We start digging into it. And I'm like, I'm not sure if this is one or not. And I'm digging with the forensic anthropologist on our team, and we find a bone. She's like, it's human. Cool. Keep digging, keep digging, keep digging. Find more bones, more bones. And I just look at her at one point and I say, how many people do we have? And she's like, you've got at least 3 now. And you're like, oh, okay, we are digging one of these things. So we dig down, and what we found was this chamber in this tomb. And inside was thousands upon thousands of broken pieces of bone. And it was clear that this is what's called a secondary burial. That is, that these people had been buried somewhere else, someone had
Mm.
dug them up, had taken their bones to this tomb, and had thrown them in there. But it was in such a way that it almost looked like they had made like a pile next to the tomb, like they'd just thrown it into a huge pile and then just grabbed bones and just kind of tossed it in, because you would find like this part of your cranium with your orbital bones, and with like a femur sticking out through one of them that was snapped in half, and all like
Sure.
they didn't care. They weren't protecting the bones. They weren't trying to put them. And this one had 14 people buried inside of it, right? So what we now say is, okay, this is interesting. Are what we're seeing here actually not these long-lived burials where people are coming back generation after generation and burying, I'm going to grandma, and then the great grandkid gets buried in there as well. And, or what are we seeing here is, are people going and digging up tombs around the area, collecting the bones of their ancestors or whoever it might be, and then building a solitary structure and throwing them all in together. And that's why, yeah, and we just didn't see that because the previous ones were so badly disturbed. So I now need to go back and say, hey guys, here's another theory. And the first paper that we wrote about this is clearly, we mentioned like, hey, this is this is our theory. Like, we don't say this is proof, this is evidence. But now we have to go back and say, well, here's an alternate theory. It could be that that was used that way and this one was used a different way, or it could be that all of them were these secondary burials. So, and we're throwing lots of science at that. We're going to throw DNA at the people, individuals. We've done the protein analysis of the teeth to work out what sex these individuals are. We're looking at the bones, the pathologies, like whether they have physical ailments and all of that kind of stuff. Like, really cool science at it. It just takes time, right?
Very, very cool. It sounds like you're really getting to the why and you're being directed by the evidence. That is, probably how you're supposed to do it, right?
Yeah, I think the problem, it comes back to what you were saying before, which is like, I tell that story and then I realize at the end, it was like, I've been talking about this tomb for 3 minutes, right? But to get that backstory and to get the understanding of why we have to change our theories, you have to just explain it. And as you said, like
Yeah.
this bite chunk thing of 30 seconds of people's attention, of like, the amount of people that I've dealt with online who have read, the title of an article and then that's it. Or they read the little, like little blurb underneath it, and they say, "Oh wow, these people are hunter gatherers. Or these people are that. Okay, that's the evidence." And it's like,
Or worse yet, someone's description of what they believe to be in that article, and then they run with it. That's what I often see
exactly,
as well.
yeah, and and it's tough because a lot of this stuff is behind paywalls in terms of the initial articles. We try to make all of our papers open access so that anyone can download them and review them. But also, we're using terminology that is not something that people in their daily lives use. And so I think that that's what I was saying before. I think there does need to be a concerted effort to kind of try and put this stuff out there in sort of a more of a entertaining way, right? Um, the problem is it's very difficult to do that when you're dealing with stuff that can sometimes be quite dry. Whereas, hey, those images on those things indicate that there was a huge, it was Noah's flood or whatever else it is. Like, that's a simple thing that I can go bang, bang, bang really quickly. And people go, oh, wow. But they're not going to necessarily go and research the actual background data of that, right? So
Yep.
it's something I think we need as a discipline to think about more is how do we give this data to people in a way that makes them understand and, you know, that it's a tough job. It's a lot of physical exercise. I spend months away from my family and I miss milestones and things because I'm out there. I don't get paid as much as I'm sure internet celebrities and Graham Hancock get paid, right? I'm doing this because I love it. And I'm doing this because in 50 or 100 years' time, people will still be using the stuff that I'm part of, the research that I'm part of. It might be all wrong, in which case, great. They're still doing great archaeology there, right? But the point is that the information will live on for a long time. Your post on Twitter, is one permablock from being you disappearing off the face of the earth. So, and no one ever thinking about you again. So, yeah. Anyway, that might be a bit vicious. Sorry.
That's okay.
No, I actually get hope from this conversation. I mean, the fact that we've seen so many more scientists or science communicators coming up to the front and gaining audiences and speaking up against the people that are communicating anti-science, and channels like ours that really aren't even geared toward science or archaeology at all. It's all politics. And we have a right winger and a left winger who find a way to agree that, hold on, this is important antiquity. We need to understand it.
And
So you're giving me hope.
like, people have these huge platforms now, and you could, as I said, you could empower the locals. You could encourage governments to give more funding to archaeology, but you use it to attack because you
Yep.
have no understanding or basic knowledge of what it is. And I mentioned earlier before that 9-meter deep pit thing that I dug, right? Or that I helped excavate with another supervisor. That took 4 years. We moved, I'm trying to remember what it exactly was now. It was 46 tons of dirt out of that. It could only fit 2 excavators in it, right? And so we had to lift the buckets out on a pulley out 9 meters above us, right, which is 3 stories up. Then that would all go get sieved and things, with multiple sievers. And the bottom of it was like 100% humidity. It was horrible down there. But you are finding something that is important for the history of that site and of that region. And so, and I think that's what people fail to grasp is uh, you know, one of the things I love doing is a little bit of quick maths, right?
Mhm.
In terms of this stuff. Like, I love kind of trying to crunch numbers. And I was thinking about it this morning. Like, I'm gonna do this, and I'm sure this is gonna open me up to people on the Twitter sphere having a go at me. But this is just to give you an idea of scale, okay? So let's say that you're digging Göbekli Tepe, all right? Already ducking behind the parapets for mentioning that name. Let's say that you're digging one of those chambers, one of the structures, right? And let's say that it's a 10-meter diameter structure, right? That's small. I think the biggest ones are like 30 meters, okay? And that's about 79 square meters when you do a bunch of nice maths to it, okay, of area that you've got to dig. Now, let's say that dirt, that the fill inside of it, let's say it's 6 meters deep. And that's me being conservative. Göbekli Tepe goes like 10 or 15 meters deep in some areas. So let's say 6 meters, right? That's now 474 cubic meters of
Cubic, yeah.
material that is being removed, right? Now, they mentioned that it's pretty heavily filled with stone, right? Limestone cobbles is what they mention. But let's just be super conservative and say 1/3 of it is limestone cobbles and 1/3 of it is dirt. Now, we know how much dirt and cobbles weigh. Limestone cobbles can weigh anywhere from I think it's like 1,800 kilograms per cubic meter to 2,800 per cubic meter, right? Depending on how porous it is and how wet and all that kind of stuff. Dirt's the same thing, right? But if you say, okay, 1/3 of this is stone and 2/3 of it is dirt, I did the maths today, right? I'm looking at the little number I have there. That's 750 tons of material that have to be carried out by hand, right? An elephant is 6 tons, like an African elephant, right? That's 124 elephants sitting in that thing that you have to remove with buckets. And the point is that it's not easy. It's physical manual labor and it takes time.
Yeah,
And
paintbrushes.
Well, and we don't just use paintbrushes. Like that's a real,
I
like
know. I know.
you scale your tools depending on what you're excavating. Sorry, you can hear by my voice that I get passionate about this because
Oh, of course.
to have someone say, well, excavation is easy, mate, come in and do it. Come out into the middle of the Saudi Arabian desert with me when it's 44 degrees
Yeah, right.
Celsius, over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Go into a tomb that is stone built that acts like a pizza oven by radiating heat into you,
Sure,
and
trapping it.
sit there and dig the human remains of a person without damaging them. And then if you blow a tire on the way home, guess what? You have to fix it because there's no, roadside assistance coming to your thing and there's no iced coffees out there and whatever else that you need, right? Come and do that with me and then tell me that I'm not doing work. I wish people came out and I wish there was an opportunity for you to go, okay, jump in the trench with me for a few hours. And your job is to do what I did as a young undergraduate and just carry buckets back and forth over and over again.
Right.
Now do that 6 days a week for 8 weeks
Sure.
in 40-degree heat. And then come back and tell me like why it's slow.
What you're doing is
You know?
easy, yeah.
And that's just
Not
like,
taking-
you might dig from 6 till 2 in the afternoon and then, you go home, have lunch, and then you spend the next several hours doing pottery washing or artifact processing. And then, you wake up bright and early before dusk to do it the next day, in dawn
Do
to
it
do it
all
the next
again.
day, right? So yeah, sorry. I got on my high horse there.
Oh,
But
I love it.
It's amazing. It's exactly what we wanted to hear from you, Dr. Thomas, and we can't thank you enough. Before we end it, I just want to know, where can people find you or connect with you or see your work that you've been working on at these sites?
Yeah, so you can check me out on Twitter. It's Hughes_news. It's an old Twitter handle I don't particularly like very much, but you can find
I
me on
like it. That's
Twitter.
good.
The project that I work on called PACUP has a Twitter page as well, PACUP_KSA. But what I'd say is anyone who's interested in archaeology, if you're interested in the practicalities of excavating, I encourage you, reach out to me, right? No judgment, even if the questions you think are silly or you just have no idea. Reach out to me. I'm more than happy to take the time to answer them. I'm happy to take the time to send you resources if that's what you want, or show you articles, because I think I enjoy teaching. I enjoy talking about archaeology. And if I can take this opportunity to encourage people to come and talk to me about it, great. And if that converts you across to thinking about real archaeology, then that's amazing. Job done.
Job done and podcast done. Mike, close us out.
Hey, thank you for another episode on Elevated Thoughts.
Thanks, you.
Yeah, thanks, guys.